In the glittering heart of Madrid, a grand gala turns deadly when a young lawyer is found stabbed under an ancient oak. A sapphire necklace vanishes, and venomous letters accuse the bride-to-be of betrayal. Enter Hercule Poirot, the master detective, whose little gray cells unravel a web of jealousy, secrets, and deceit. As the villa's elegant guests, each hiding a motive, face his piercing gaze, a single crimson silk scrap holds the key to unmasking the murderer of Madrid. Will Poirot restore order before the killer strikes again? Dive into a mystery where every glance conceals a lie. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Madrid. The October light filtered through the heavy curtains of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany table where he sat, a picture of fastidious elegance. His small, precise hands adjusted a silver teaspoon, aligning it with geometric perfection beside its fellows. The morning had been uneventful, save for a minor irritation. A speck of dust on his immaculate black patent leather shoes, which he had banished with a flick of his silk handkerchief. It was, as he often remarked to himself, the little imperfections that disturbed the harmony of life most profoundly. The arrival of the post disrupted his reverie. Among the usual bills and invitations lay a letter that stood apart, an envelope of thick cream vellum, its surface embossed with a crimson lion, exuding an air of old-world grandeur. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with curiosity as he slid it open with a pearl-handled letter opener. The letter was from Señor Diego Alvarez, a Spanish diplomat of considerable repute, whose name Poirot vaguely recalled from a diplomatic soirée some years prior. Written in a flowing, elegant script, the letter invited Poirot to a gala at Alvarez's villa on the outskirts of Madrid to celebrate the engagement of his daughter, Isabella, to a promising young lawyer, Carlos Mendoza. But it was the postscript that quickened Poirot's pulse. "I find myself in need of your unparalleled discretion, Monsieur Poirot, for a matter most delicate. Certain irregularities have arisen, and I trust only your insight to resolve them before they cast a shadow over our joy." The word irregularities danced before Poirot's eyes, a tantalizing hint of a puzzle. He leaned back in his chair, stroking his meticulously groomed mustache, and murmured, "Mon Dieu, a challenge worthy of Hercule Poirot." Within the hour, he had telephoned his faithful friend, Captain Hastings, to decline a proposed golf outing, a sport Poirot considered barbaric in its disregard for symmetry, and booked passage on the next train to Paris, with a connection to Madrid. The journey was a study in contrasts. The clatter of the train wheels soothed Poirot's orderly mind, but a smudge on his shoe, acquired during the transfer at Gare du Nord, provoked a grimace of displeasure. He restored the shine with a vigor that startled a fellow passenger, a stout matron who mistook his fervor for a personal affront. Upon arriving in Madrid, Poirot was met at the station by a sleek black car sent by Alvarez. The drive to the villa revealed a city vibrant with life, cobbled streets lined with orange trees, their scent mingling with the dust of late autumn. The Alvarez estate, perched on a hill overlooking the Manzanares River, was a vision of opulence. Whitewashed walls gleamed under terracotta roofs, and wrought iron gates opened onto gardens where fountains sang softly. Poirot approved of the symmetry, though he noted with a frown a single rosebush slightly askew in its planting. Señor Diego Alvarez greeted him at the grand entrance, his silver hair catching the sunlight, his demeanor one of courteous restraint. A tall man in his late 50s, Alvarez carried the weight of authority with ease, yet his dark eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Over tea, in a salon adorned with tapestries, he confided the reason for his summons. The gala, set for the following evening, was to be a glittering affair, attended by Madrid's elite. Yet troubling incidents had marred the preparations. Anonymous letters, penned in a venomous tone, had accused Isabella of deceit and infidelity, threatening to expose her to scandal. Furthermore, a priceless heirloom, a sapphire necklace once belonging to Alvarez's late wife, had vanished from a locked safe. "I cannot allow these shadows to fall upon my daughter's happiness," Alvarez said, his voice low. "I beg you, Monsieur Poirot, to observe, to listen, to uncover the truth." Poirot inclined his head, his mind already alight with possibilities. "Rest assured, Señor Alvarez, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot are at your service. I shall attend your gala, and I shall see what others do not." As he sipped his tea, served to his relief in a cup of perfect porcelain, he resolved to bring order to this chaos, as only he could. Chapter 2. The Guests Assemble. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand ballroom of the Alvarez villa, his small, immaculate figure a study in precision amid the swirl of Madrid's high society. The room was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across gilded walls, and the polished marble floor reflected the elegant movements of the guests. Poirot, clad in a perfectly tailored dinner jacket, adjusted his bow tie with a delicate flick of his fingers, his green eyes scanning the assembly with the keenness of a hawk. The gala was in full swing, the air alive with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of cultured voices. Yet Poirot's mind was attuned to the undercurrents of tension that rippled beneath the surface. Señor Alvarez's cryptic mention of irregularities had set his little gray cells in motion, and he was determined to observe every detail, every glance, every gesture that might betray the truth. The guests were a carefully curated selection of Madrid's elite, each a potential piece in the puzzle Poirot had been summoned to solve. At the center of the gathering was Isabella Alvarez, the bride-to-be, whose beauty was as striking as it was delicate. Her raven hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown shimmered with every movement, yet her dark eyes held a shadow of unease that intrigued Poirot. She moved among the guests with practiced grace, her laughter bright but fleeting, as though she were playing a part she no longer fully believed in. At her side was Carlos Mendoza, her fiancé, a handsome man in his early 30s with a lawyer's polish and a smile that, to Poirot's discerning eye, seemed to lack warmth. His dark suit was impeccable, but his posture, stiff, almost guarded, suggested a man ill at ease in his own triumph. Poirot's attention shifted to the other key figures, each of whom he catalogued with meticulous care. Maria Cortez, Isabella's childhood friend, was a woman of sharp contrasts. Her auburn hair and vivacious manner drew eyes, but her quick, darting glances betrayed a nervous energy. She wore a crimson silk gown that caught the light, and her laughter, though frequent, had a brittle edge. Poirot noted her proximity to Isabella, the way her hand lingered on her friend's arm, as if anchoring herself to the other's stability. Across the room, Sofia Valencia, a celebrated opera singer, commanded attention with her statuesque presence. Her golden hair was piled high, and her sapphire blue dress clung to her form, drawing admiring glances. Yet her eyes, fixed on Carlos with an intensity that bordered on hunger, told a story of unrequited passion. Poirot recalled the whispers of a past romance between her and the groom-to-be, a detail that added a layer of complexity to the evening. Dr. Esteban Ruiz, a portly physician with a florid complexion, stood near the buffet, his glass of brandy never far from his lips. His jovial demeanor masked a certain shrewdness, and Poirot observed how his eyes followed Isabella with a paternal, yet oddly possessive, affection. Lastly, there was Javier Lopez, Alvarez's business partner, a man whose blunt manner and restless movements set him apart from the polished assembly. His dark suit was slightly rumpled, and his habit of glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting an unseen pursuer, piqued Poirot's curiosity. When Alvarez mentioned the missing sapphire necklace in passing, Javier's abrupt exit from the conversation did not escape the detective's notice. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Poirot declined an invitation to dance from a vivacious young widow, preferring to remain a spectator. He positioned himself near a marble pillar, his small stature rendering him nearly invisible, yet his mind was a whirl of observation. He noted Maria's whispered exchange with Isabella near the French doors, their heads bent close, Maria's expression one of urgency. Isabella's smile faltered, and she touched her friend's arm, as if to soothe or silence her. Sophia, meanwhile, glided past Carlos, her fingers brushing his sleeve in a gesture too deliberate to be accidental. Carlos's response, a fleeting frown, suggested discomfort rather than affection. Dr. Ruiz, having secured another brandy, laughed loudly at a joke, but his eyes darted toward the garden doors, where Javier had reappeared, his face flushed. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The music seemed to falter, though the orchestra played on, and a chill breeze swept through the open doors leading to the terrace. He followed the movement of the crowd, his patent leather shoes silent on the marble, and stepped onto the terrace, where the scent of jasmine mingled with the crisp autumn air. The gardens beyond were a labyrinth of manicured hedges and ancient oaks, their branches casting long shadows in the moonlight. Poirot's gaze lingered on the stone path that wound through the grounds, its surface gleaming with dew. He made a mental note to inspect it later, for a path so exposed might hold secrets of its own. The evening progressed, the guests' laughter growing louder as the champagne flowed. Poirot, sipping a tisane he had requested in lieu of wine, continued his silent vigil. He overheard fragments of conversation, a diplomat's jest about Madrid's political intrigues, a dowager's complaint about the declining quality of Spanish lace. But it was the undercurrents that held his attention, the way Maria's eyes followed Isabella, the way Sophia's smile tightened when Carlos spoke to another woman, the way Javier's hand clenched around his glass when Alvarez toasted the happy couple. Each gesture, each glance, was a thread in the tapestry Poirot was weaving in his mind. As the clock neared midnight, the mood shifted once more. The music paused, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Poirot, alerted by some instinct honed over years of unraveling human mysteries, moved toward the garden doors. A piercing scream shattered the night, high and raw, cutting through the chatter like a blade. The guests froze, then surged toward the sound, Poirot at their forefront, his small frame weaving through the throng with surprising agility. Outside, beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, Isabella stood, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. At her feet lay Carlos Mendoza, his dark suit stained with a spreading crimson pool, a dagger buried in his chest. The ornate handle gleamed in the moonlight, a silent accusation in the stillness. Poirot knelt beside the body, his handkerchief protecting his fingers as he examined the scene. The dagger was an antique, its hilt intricately carved, suggesting a weapon of significance rather than convenience. The grass around Carlos was undisturbed, the dew unbroken save for the stone path nearby, which bore no footprints. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he spotted a scrap of crimson silk caught on a rosebush, its delicate weave glinting faintly. It matched no attire he had observed that evening, and he tucked it into his pocket with care. The guests, now gathered in a shocked semicircle, whispered and gasped, but Poirot's mind was already at work, sorting, analyzing, seeking the pattern that would reveal the murderer of Madrid. Chapter 3. The Scene of the Crime. The night air hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and tragedy as Hercule Poirot stood over the lifeless form of Carlos Mendoza, his keen eyes absorbing every detail of the grim tableau. The ancient oak loomed above, its gnarled branches casting jagged shadows across the dew-dampened lawn. The dagger, its ornate hilt gleaming with malevolent elegance, protruded from Carlos's chest, a single, precise wound that spoke of both skill and intent. The guests, clustered at a cautious distance, murmured in hushed horror, their faces pale under the moonlight. Isabella Alvarez, trembling beside a stone bench, was supported by her father, whose stern countenance betrayed a flicker of anguish. Poirot, his small frame radiating calm authority, raised a hand to silence the crowd, his voice cutting through the chaos with measured clarity. "Mesdames et messieurs, remain where you are, s'il vous plaît. The police will arrive shortly. But until then, Hercule Poirot takes charge of this scene." His words, though softly spoken, carried an undeniable weight, and the guests obeyed, their eyes darting between the body and the diminutive detective. Señor Alvarez nodded his assent, his trust in Poirot absolute. With a gesture, Poirot summoned the butler, a wiry man named Antonio, to fetch lanterns and ensure no one left the villa. The investigation, Poirot knew, must begin at once, for the truth was freshest in the chaos of the moment. He knelt beside Carlos, his patent leather shoes carefully avoiding the grass, and examined the body with the precision of a watchmaker. The dagger had entered just below the sternum, angled upward to pierce the heart, a strike so exact it suggested medical knowledge or practiced skill. The lack of defensive wounds on Carlos's hands indicated he had not anticipated the attack, perhaps trusting his assailant. Poirot's gaze swept the surrounding lawn, noting the unbroken dew, which glistened undisturbed except along the stone path leading from the terrace. This path, he deduced, was the killer's route, for it left no trace of passage. His fingers, protected by a silk handkerchief, brushed against the dagger's hilt, its intricate engravings suggesting an heirloom rather than a common weapon. A clue, perhaps, but one that required context. Rising, Poirot turned his attention to the rose bush where he had earlier spotted the crimson silk. Under the lantern's glow, he retrieved the scrap, its fine weave and vivid hue distinct from any garment worn at the gala. It was not torn violently, but delicately, as if caught in passing, suggesting haste or carelessness. Tucking it into an envelope, he marked it as a piece of the puzzle, its significance yet to be unraveled. His eyes then fell on Isabella, her emerald gown now crumpled, her face a mask of shock. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, approaching her, "you will tell Poirot, please, how you came to find Monsieur Mendoza." Isabella's voice trembled as she spoke, her words halting. I needed air. The ballroom was so warm, and I stepped outside. I walked toward the oak. It's always been my favorite spot. Then I saw him, lying there. She broke off, a sob escaping her. "I didn't see anyone else, I swear." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, but his mind noted the simplicity of her account, its lack of embellishment a point in its favor, yet not conclusive. The police arrived, led by Inspector Vargas, a lean man with a mustache almost as fastidious as Poirot's own. Vargas, recognizing the famed detective, agreed to let him conduct initial inquiries, provided he shared his findings. Poirot wasted no time, ushering the key guests into the villa's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and lit by a roaring fire. The suspects, for so Poirot now considered them, sat in uneasy silence. Maria Cortez, her crimson gown now seeming too bold, Sofia Valencia, her sapphire dress a stark contrast to her pallor, Dr. Esteban Ruiz clutching a fresh brandy, and Javier Lopez, his restless energy barely contained. Alvarez remained by the door, his presence a quiet command. Poirot began with Maria. "Mademoiselle Cortez, where were you when the scream was heard?" Maria's fingers twisted a lace handkerchief as she answered. "I was dancing with Señor Rivera, a diplomat. The music was loud, but I heard Isabella's cry and ran outside with the others." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked toward Isabella, a gesture Poirot filed away. Sophia was next, her poise returning as she spoke. "I took a brief walk in the garden earlier, perhaps 10 minutes before the scream. I saw nothing unusual, only the stars and the shadows. I was back in the ballroom when it happened." Her tone was smooth, almost rehearsed, and Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of his skepticism. Dr. Ruiz, his face flushed from more than the fire, claimed to have been in the smoking room, deep in conversation with a retired general. "I'm no stranger to death, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice thick. "But this was a shock." His hand shook as he raised his glass, and Poirot noted the tremor, wondering if it stemmed from guilt or merely brandy. Javier Lopez was the most guarded, his answers clipped. "I was at the bar, fetching a drink. I didn't see Carlos after dinner. I heard the scream and followed the crowd." His eyes avoided Poirot's, and his fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the arm of his chair. Each alibi was plausible, yet Poirot sensed a dissonance, a thread of deceit woven into the tapestry of their words. He dismissed them with a polite nod, requesting they remain available. As the library emptied, he lingered, his gaze settling on a portrait of Alvarez's late wife, her sapphire necklace gleaming in the painted light. The coincidence of the stolen heirloom and the murder was too striking to ignore. Was the necklace the motive or a distraction? And the crimson silk, whose hand had left it behind? Retiring to his guest room, Poirot sat at a small desk, his notebook open before him. He sketched a diagram of the garden, marking the oak, the path, and the rosebush. The dagger's precision, the undisturbed dew, the silk scrap, all were pieces of a puzzle that demanded order. He closed his eyes, his little gray cells humming, and murmured, "The truth, it hides in the details, but Hercule Poirot will find it." As the villa settled into an uneasy silence, he knew the murderer of Madrid was among them, and he would not rest until the mask was torn away. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Secrets. The morning sun rose over Madrid, its golden rays doing little to dispel the pall of suspicion that hung over the Alvarez villa. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood at the window of his guest room, his green eyes fixed on the garden where Carlos Mendoza had met his end. The ancient oak stood sentinel, its branches still, as if guarding the secrets of the night. Poirot's breakfast, a single boiled egg and a cup of tisane, sat untouched on the table, for his appetite was for truth alone. The murder, the stolen necklace, the anonymous letters accusing Isabella of betrayal. These were not disparate threads, but parts of a single intricate tapestry, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. He began his day with the household staff, whose eyes often saw what their masters overlooked. In the servants' hall, a narrow room redolent of polished wood and coffee, Poirot interviewed Elena, a young maid with a nervous habit of twisting her apron. Under his gentle but insistent questioning, she revealed a crucial detail. 3 days before the gala, she had overheard Carlos arguing with Javier Lopez in the villa's study. Their voices, raised in anger, had carried through the closed door, with Carlos accusing Javier of falsifying documents in a business deal. Senor Lopez stormed out, his face like thunder. Elena whispered, glancing fearfully at the door. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching with interest. A motive, perhaps, rooted in commerce rather than passion. Next, he spoke with Antonio, the butler, whose stiff posture and precise diction suggested a man who prided himself on discretion. Yet Poirot's probing elicited a startling revelation. A stranger, cloaked in dark fabric, had been seen lingering near the villa's gates a week prior, watching the house with unsettling intensity. Antonio had reported it to Senor Alvarez, who dismissed it as a vagrant's curiosity, but the memory lingered in the butler's mind. Poirot's little gray cells hummed. This cloaked figure might be a key, or a distraction planted to obscure the truth. Armed with these insights, Poirot requested to see the anonymous letters sent to Isabella. Alvarez produced them from a locked drawer in his study, their envelopes unmarked but for a faint scent of lavender. The letters, written in an elegant, almost calligraphic script, accused Isabella of betraying Carlos with another lover, their tone venomous yet oddly theatrical, as if penned for effect. "You play the innocent, but your heart is false," read one, its words curling like smoke. Poirot studied the handwriting, noting its flourishes, which suggested a feminine hand, or a clever imitation. He tucked a mental note away. The writer was someone with access to Isabella's private world, someone who knew her fears. His next move was to confront Sofia Valencia, whose past with Carlos was a whispered scandal among the guests. He found her in the villa's conservatory, surrounded by blooming orchids, her golden hair catching the light like a halo. She wore a morning dress of pale blue, but her composure faltered as Poirot mentioned the letters. "Mademoiselle Valencia," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "You loved Monsieur Mendoza once, did you not? And perhaps you love him still?" Sophia's eyes flashed, but she denied writing the letters, her voice steady. "I am an artist, Monsieur Poirot, not a schemer. My heart is my own, and I wish Isabella no harm." Yet her fingers trembled as she adjusted a flower, and Poirot marked the inconsistency between her words and her demeanor. Maria Cortez proved a different challenge. Poirot found her in the drawing-room, sketching idly on a pad, her crimson gown replaced by a simple gray dress that did little to dull her restless energy. Under his questioning, her usual wit gave way to agitation. "Why do you press me, monsieur? I told you, I was dancing when it happened." But Poirot, with the patience of a chess master, probed deeper, asking about her friendship with Isabella. Maria's eyes welled with tears as she confessed a painful truth. She envied Isabella's effortless charm, her perfect life. "I've always been the shadow to her light," she said, her voice breaking. "But I would never hurt her, or Carlos." Poirot nodded, his expression sympathetic, but his mind noted her emotional volatility, a potential spark for darker deeds. As the day wore on, Poirot walked the garden path once more, retracing the killer's likely route. The stone path, swept clean by the staff, offered no new clues, but the rose bush, where the crimson silk had been found, drew his attention. He examined its thorns, imagining the moment of the murder. A swift approach, a single strike, a retreat into the shadows. The precision of the act suggested not just intent, but familiarity, perhaps with the victim or the villa itself. He returned to the house, his thoughts circling the necklace, the letters, and the cloaked stranger. Were they pieces of one crime, or a clever web of misdirection? That evening, as the villa's occupants gathered for a subdued dinner, Poirot observed them anew. Javier's brusque manner seemed forced, as if masking guilt or fear. Dr. Ruiz, his brandy glass ever present, spoke too loudly of trivial matters, his eyes avoiding the empty chair where Carlos would have sat. Sophia's poise was a brittle mask, and Maria's forced cheer grated against the somber mood. Isabella, pale and silent, clung to her father's arm, her eyes haunted by loss. Alvarez himself, though composed, betrayed his strain in the tightness of his jaw. Poirot retired early, his notebook filling with diagrams and questions. The argument between Carlos and Javier pointed to a financial motive, but the letters suggested a crime of passion. The cloaked stranger, if real, hinted at an outsider, yet the dagger's antique design felt personal, tied to the villa's history. And the crimson silk, whose garment had it come from? As he polished his mustache in the mirror, Poirot murmured, "The truth, it is like a melody, hidden in the discord, but Hercule Poirot will hear it." The murderer of Madrid was close, their shadow lengthening with each passing hour, and Poirot's little gray cells were poised to strike. Chapter 5. The necklace resurfaces. The Alvarez villa, though bathed in the warm light of a Madrid afternoon, seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves sensed the weight of the unsolved crime. Hercule Poirot, his morning routine of a perfectly brewed tisane and a single slice of toast completed, paced the gravel path of the garden, his small, precise steps a counterpoint to the turmoil within his mind. The murder of Carlos Mendoza, the venomous anonymous letters, the missing sapphire necklace. These were not mere incidents, but notes in a symphony of deceit, and Poirot was determined to conduct the truth to its crescendo. His green eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the manicured hedges, seeking inspiration in their orderly lines, for order, he believed, was the key to unlocking chaos. The day's first revelation came unexpectedly. A gardener, a stooped man named Pablo, approached Señor Alvarez with a startling discovery. The missing sapphire necklace, its gems winking like captured stars, had been found nestled in the base of a marble fountain near the villa's western gate. Wrapped in a silk scarf, it had been hastily concealed, as if the thief had panicked or sought to taunt. Alvarez summoned Poirot at once, and the detective, his patent leather shoes crunching on the gravel, examined the find with meticulous care. The necklace, a cascade of sapphires set in gold filigree, was indeed the heirloom Alvarez had described, a relic of his late wife's legacy. The scarf, however, was the true prize, a delicate swath of crimson silk, its texture and hue identical to the scrap Poirot had retrieved from the rosebush on the night of the murder. A monogram, SV, was embroidered in gold thread at one corner, a clue as blatant as it was suspicious. Poirot's mustache twitched as he held the scarf to the light, its sheen catching the sun. SV, he murmured. Sofia Valencia? Or a clever masquerade? He instructed Pablo to leave the necklace untouched until Inspector Vargas could document it, then turned his attention to the fountain. Its base, mossy and damp, bore no footprints or signs of struggle, suggesting the necklace had been placed there after the gala, perhaps under cover of darkness. The discovery electrified the household, whispers of the murderer of Madrid spreading like wildfire among the staff. Poirot, however, remained calm, his little gray cells weaving connections between the necklace, the silk, and the dagger's fatal precision. He sought out Sofia Valencia in the villa's music room, where she sat at a grand piano, her fingers idly tracing a melancholic melody. Her sapphire blue dress had been replaced by a cream ensemble, but her poise was as striking as ever. Poirot wasted no time. "Mademoiselle Valencia," he began, producing the scarf with a flourish. "This bears your initials, found with the stolen necklace. You will explain, s'il vous plaît." Sophia's eyes widened, but her recovery was swift. "That scarf was stolen from my room weeks ago," she said, her voice steady, but her hands clasping tightly. "I reported it to the housekeeper, but no one took it seriously. Someone is trying to implicate me, Monsieur Poirot." Her gaze was defiant, yet Poirot detected a flicker of fear. He pressed her further, asking about her movements after her garden walk on the night of the murder. She insisted she had returned to the ballroom, mingling with guests, and had no knowledge of the necklace's fate. Poirot nodded, his expression neutral, but his mind marked her story as plausible yet unverified. Next, he turned to Dr. Esteban Ruiz, whose medical expertise made him a candidate for the dagger's precise strike. Poirot found him in the villa's smoking room, a haze of cigar smoke curling around his florid face. The doctor, his brandy glass predictably in hand, greeted Poirot with forced joviality. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't suspect an old man like me of such a grisly act?" He chuckled, but his eyes were wary. Poirot, with the precision of a fencer, questioned him about the dagger's wound. "A single strike to the heart, doctor, requires skill. You, with your knowledge of anatomy, could execute such a blow, non?" Ruiz bristled, his face reddening further. "I was 3 brandies deep that night, monsieur. My hands were unsteady. I could barely light my cigar, let alone wield a dagger." His indignation seemed genuine, but Poirot noted the tremor in his fingers, wondering if it was a lingering effect of alcohol or a sign of guilt. The resurfacing of the necklace shifted Poirot's perspective. Its poor concealment suggested not a master thief, but someone desperate to deflect suspicion. Was it a clumsy attempt to frame Sophia, or had she herself placed it there, believing it would exonerate her? The monogram was too convenient, too theatrical, echoing the flourish of the anonymous letters. Poirot's thoughts circled back to the murder itself, the dagger's antique design, the undisturbed dew, the crimson silk. He theorized that the theft and the murder were intertwined, not by greed, but by a deeper motive: jealousy, betrayal, or revenge. The necklace's return was a move in a larger game, one Poirot intended to win. That evening, he gathered the guests in the drawing room, the fire casting long shadows across their tense faces. Isabella sat pale and silent, her father's hand on her shoulder. Maria fidgeted with her bracelet, her eyes darting to Sophia, who maintained an icy calm. Javier's restless energy was palpable, his fingers drumming on his knee, while Dr. Ruiz sipped his brandy with forced nonchalance. Poirot stood before them, his small stature commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear. "The necklace has returned, but the murderer remains among us. Hercule Poirot is close to the truth, and the one who wields the dagger will not escape." His words hung in the air, and he watched their reactions. Maria's sharp intake of breath, Sophia's tightened lips, Javier's clenched fists, Ruiz's unsteady hand. Each was a note in the melody of guilt, and Poirot's little gray cells were attuned to every nuance. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze settling on a portrait of Alvarez's late wife, the necklace gleaming at her throat. The painting, like the villa, held secrets, and he sensed the truth was near. He retired to his room, his notebook open, sketching connections. The letters, the scarf, the dagger, the cloaked stranger. "The murderer," he murmured, "believes they have outwitted Poirot, but they have not reckoned with the little gray cells." The night deepened, and the villa's silence was a canvas for his thoughts, each clue a brushstroke in the portrait of the killer. Chapter 6. The alibi unravels. The Alvarez villa, though grand in its architecture, seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion, its corridors echoing with the unspoken fears of its occupants. Hercule Poirot, his morning ritual of aligning his tie and polishing his patent leather shoes complete, stood in the library, his small frame dwarfed by towering bookshelves. The fire had died to embers, but his mind burned with clarity, each clue in the murder of Carlos Mendoza, a spark in the intricate machinery of his little gray cells. The sapphire necklace's return, wrapped in Sofia Valencia's monogrammed scarf, had shifted the puzzle's contours, but the crimson silk scrap, the antique dagger, and the anonymous letters still pointed to a truth hidden in plain sight. Today, Poirot resolved to test the alibis that shielded the murderer, for he knew that even the most carefully woven lie would fray under scrutiny. He began with Javier Lopez, whose brusque demeanor and restless habits marked him as a man with secrets. Poirot found him in the villa's study, poring over a ledger with an intensity that seemed more theatrical than genuine. "Señor Lopez?" Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. "You claimed to be fetching a drink when Mademoiselle Isabella's scream was heard. Yet the bar is but a few steps from the ballroom. Why, then, did no one see you there?" Javier's eyes flickered, his fingers tightening on the ledger. "I was delayed," he muttered. "A waiter spilled wine on my cuff and I went to clean it. Poirot's mustache twitched. A curious delay, monsieur, for a man so eager to avoid attention. He pressed further, asking about the argument Elena, the maid, had overheard between Javier and Carlos. Javier's face darkened. Business disputes, nothing more. Carlos was reckless with investments. I warned him, that's all. His denial was firm, but his averted gaze betrayed unease. To test Javier's story, Poirot summoned Antonio, the butler, whose memory was as precise as his starched collar. Antonio confirmed that Javier had indeed approached the bar, but only after a noticeable absence from the ballroom, lasting perhaps 15 minutes. "He seemed agitated, Monsieur Poirot," Antonio added, "and his cuff was damp, though I saw no wine." Poirot nodded, filing this discrepancy away. A damp cuff, a missing quarter hour, small threads, but enough to unravel a lie. With Inspector Vargas's permission, Poirot searched Javier's quarters, a task he undertook with the precision of an artist. In a locked drawer concealed beneath a stack of contracts, he found a dark woolen cloak, its hem frayed as if caught on brambles. Tucked inside was a letter, its elegant script matching the anonymous notes sent to Isabella. Addressed to Javier, it read, "Carlos must be stopped before he ruins us all." The signature was absent, but the lavender scent and theatrical flourishes mirrored the earlier letters. Confronted, Javier paled, insisting the cloak was for discreet visits to a mistress in Madrid, not for lurking near the villa. The letter, he claimed, was a business warning, not a plot. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We shall see, monsieur, if your mistress confirms your tale." Next, Poirot turned to the scene of the crime itself, orchestrating a reconstruction to test the guests' accounts. In the garden, under the late afternoon sun, he gathered Isabella, Maria, Sofia, Dr. Ruiz, and Javier, along with Inspector Vargas and a few trusted staff. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "we shall retrace your steps on the night of the murder. Precision is all." He directed each to walk their claimed path, observing their movements with hawk-like intensity. Isabella, pale but composed, retraced her route to the oak, her steps hesitant but consistent with her story. Sophia's garden walk was graceful, her timing aligning with her earlier claim. Dr. Ruiz, unsteady from his habitual brandy, shuffled to the smoking room, his path unremarkable. Maria, however, faltered. As she passed the rose bush where the crimson silk had been found, her gray skirt caught briefly on a thorn, mirroring the snag Poirot had envisioned. He paused the reconstruction, his voice gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle Cortez, your gown on the night of the gala, it was crimson silk, was it not?" Maria's eyes widened, her hands twisting together. "Yes, but it was torn at the hem. I thought nothing of it." Under Poirot's relentless gaze, she crumbled, her voice rising in panic. "I followed Carlos that night, Monsieur Poirot. I was angry. He'd been so cold to Isabella, and I wanted to know why. I saw him near the oak, and then he fell, but I didn't touch him. I ran back, terrified I'd be blamed." Her tears were genuine, but Poirot noted the timing. Her presence at the scene placed her dangerously close to the murder. The reconstruction complete, Poirot retreated to the terrace, his notebook open to a fresh page. He sketched the garden's layout, marking Maria's hesitation, Javier's cloak, and the letter's cryptic warning. The cloak suggested a connection to the mysterious stranger Antonio had seen, but its presence in Javier's room was too convenient, perhaps planted to mislead. Maria's confession, while emotional, did not fully account for the dagger's precision. The letter's script, so like the anonymous notes, hinted at a deeper conspiracy. But who was its author? Sophia's scarf, the necklace, the silk scrap, all pointed to a deliberate attempt to shift blame, but the murderer's hand remained elusive. As dusk settled over the villa, Poirot stood alone, the distant hum of Madrid fading into silence. The pieces were aligning, but the pattern was incomplete. "The murderer," he murmured, "believes they have outplayed Hercule Poirot, but the game is not yet over." His little gray cells churned, weaving the threads of evidence into a tapestry that would soon reveal the face of the killer. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The grand salon of the Alvarez villa, with its gilded mirrors and velvet drapes, was a stage set for truth, and Hercule Poirot was its master director. The evening light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the gathered guests, their faces taut with anticipation and dread. The murder of Carlos Mendoza, the venomous letters, the stolen and returned sapphire necklace, all had woven a web of suspicion that now tightened around them. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small stature commanding as he adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate precision. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, swept over the assembly. Isabella, pale and fragile beside her father. Maria, Cortez, her hands clasped tightly. Sofia Valencia, her poise a brittle mask. Javier Lopez, his restless energy stilled by unease, and Dr. Esteban Ruiz, his brandy glass absent for once, his florid face betraying a flicker of fear. Señor Alvarez stood by the fireplace, his silver hair catching the firelight, his gaze fixed on Poirot with unwavering trust. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, "the crime we confront is one of passion, betrayal, and cunning. But Hercule Poirot sees through the shadows to the truth, and tonight the murderer of Madrid shall be unmasked." A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot's raised hand silenced it. He began with the anonymous letters, their elegant script and lavender scent, a theatrical flourish designed to torment Isabella. "These were penned by one among you," he said, his eyes locking on Sofia Valencia. "Mademoiselle Valencia, your jealousy of Mademoiselle Isabella, born of your unrequited love for Carlos Mendoza, drove you to write these cruel missives. You sought to sow discord, to fracture their engagement." Sofia's lips parted in protest, but Poirot continued, relentless. "The scarf bearing your initials, found with the necklace, was no theft as you claimed. You placed it there, hoping to cast suspicion on another, perhaps Mademoiselle Cortez, whose crimson gown matched a silk scrap found by the rosebush." Sofia's composure cracked, her voice rising. "I wrote the letters, yes, out of pain, but I did not kill Carlos. I loved him." Her admission, raw and unguarded, confirmed Poirot's suspicion, but he turned from her, for she was not the murderer. He addressed the necklace next, its sudden reappearance a deliberate act. "The thief hid it poorly, as if to ensure its discovery," he said. This was no act of greed, but a distraction meant to muddy the waters of the true crime, the murder. His gaze shifted to Javier Lopez, whose fingers twitched nervously. "Señor Lopez, your cloak, found with a letter echoing the anonymous notes, suggests you conspired against Carlos. Your argument with him over business dealings gave you motive, yet the cloak was too conveniently placed, a clumsy attempt to frame you." Javier's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his earlier bluster gone. Poirot's attention turned to Maria Cortez, whose emotional confession during the reconstruction had placed her at the scene. Mademoiselle Cortez, your envy of Isabella led you to follow Carlos, and your gown's torn silk matched the scrap by the rosebush. But your panic, your flight, these speak of fear, not guilt. Maria's eyes welled with tears, but Poirot's tone softened. You are not the murderer, but you saw more than you have told. Speak, s'il vous plaît. Maria shook her head, trembling, and Poirot let her be, for his focus had shifted to the final piece of the puzzle. He turned to Dr. Esteban Ruiz, whose jovial facade had crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. Doctor, Poirot said, his voice now a scalpel. The dagger's strike was precise, a single blow to the heart, requiring medical knowledge. You, with your expertise, could deliver such a wound. You claimed intoxication rendered you incapable, yet your hand was steady enough to light a cigar moments before the scream. Ruiz's face flushed, his voice hoarse. You accuse me on such flimsy grounds? I was in the smoking room. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No, doctor. The silk scrap by the rosebush was not from Mademoiselle Cortez's gown, but from your cufflink, embroidered with your initials, torn in the act. You mistook it for her crimson silk in the dark, a fatal error. Your love for Isabella, unacknowledged but consuming, drove you to madness. Carlos, her fiancé, was an obstacle, and you removed him with the precision of a surgeon. The room fell silent, the air thick with shock. Ruiz staggered, his face crumpling. I couldn't bear to see her with him, he whispered. She deserved better. His confession, raw and broken, was the final note in Poirot's symphony. Inspector Vargas stepped forward, his mustache twitching with approval as he took Ruiz into custody. The guests dispersed, their faces a mix of relief and horror. Isabella clung to her father, her tears silent, while Sophia and Maria exchanged a glance of shared guilt and sorrow. Javier, exonerated but shaken, slipped away without a word. Poirot, his task complete, stood alone by the fireplace, his notebook closed. The truth had been restored, the murderer unmasked, and order prevailed once more. Chapter 8. The Departure. The Alvarez villa, once a beacon of festivity, now stood cloaked in the somber hush of resolution. The morning sun, filtering through the tall windows of the grand salon, cast a pale light on the polished floors, as if reluctant to disturb the aftermath of tragedy. Hercule Poirot, his suitcase packed with the precision of a military campaign, stood in the entrance hall, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustache immaculately groomed. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine from the gardens, a bitter-sweet reminder of the night Carlos Mendoza met his fate. Poirot's little gray cells, having unraveled the knot of deceit, were at rest, yet his heart bore the quiet weight of human frailty exposed. Isabella Alvarez descended the grand staircase, her emerald eyes red-rimmed but resolute. She wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the radiant gown of the gala, yet her dignity remained unbroken. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady despite her grief, I owe you more than words can express. You have brought clarity to our darkness. Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of gentle humility. Mademoiselle, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to restore order where chaos reigns. Your courage in the face of loss honors your heart. Señor Diego Alvarez joined his daughter, his silver hair catching the light, his face etched with the strain of betrayal. Dr. Esteban Ruiz, a trusted friend, had been revealed as the murderer, his obsession with Isabella the spark that ignited a fatal act. Alvarez clasped Poirot's hand, his grip firm. "You have saved my daughter's future, monsieur. The shadow of this crime will not haunt her forever." Poirot, ever averse to sentiment, replied softly, "Senor, the truth is its own reward, but guard your daughter well, for her heart is precious." The other guests had already departed, their roles in the drama clarified. Sofia Valencia, her jealousy exposed as the source of the venomous letters, had left for Madrid's opera house, her pride chastened but her talent undimmed. Maria Cortez, shaken by her proximity to the crime, had vowed to mend her friendship with Isabella, her envy replaced by remorse. Javier Lopez, cleared of suspicion but humbled by the scrutiny, had retreated to his business affairs, his brusque manner softened by the ordeal. The villa, now emptied of its temporary inhabitants, seemed to exhale, its grandeur restored, but its innocence forever altered. Poirot's final act was a quiet walk through the garden, his steps measured along the stone path where the murder had occurred. The ancient oak stood sentinel, its branches whispering in the breeze, and the rose bush, once a silent witness to the crime, bore no trace of the crimson silk that had led to Ruiz's downfall. Poirot paused, his green eyes reflective. "The human heart," he murmured. "It is a labyrinth, but the little gray cells, they find the way." The sapphire necklace, now returned to Alvarez's safe, and the antique dagger, now in police custody, were mere objects, but their roles in the tragedy spoke of deeper motives: love twisted into obsession, trust shattered by deceit. At the station, Poirot boarded the train to Paris, his compartment as orderly as his mind. The journey back to London stretched before him, a canvas for reflection. He declined the porter's offer of coffee, preferring the clarity of his thoughts to the distraction of refreshment. As the train clattered through the Spanish countryside, Poirot polished his mustache with a silk handkerchief, a ritual that soothed him. The murderer of Madrid was no more, the truth laid bare by his relentless logic. Yet, as the fields gave way to city spires, he pondered the fragility of human passions, so easily swayed by envy, love, or vengeance. In his notebook, he wrote a final entry. "The case of Carlos Mendoza is closed. The order is restored, but the heart, it weeps still." Closing the book, he leaned back, his eyes half closed, and allowed himself a rare moment of repose. Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, had triumphed once more, and the world, for now, was set aright.